in accommodating my schedule this morning. It's really appreciated. I believe Ali is uniquely qualified to face the challenges before DHS. He offers a diverse background and a set of experiences in both the private and public sectors that are going to serve him well. Ali was born in Cuba, fled with his family to the United States in 1960. He attended the University of California at Berkeley, where he earned a bachelor's degree with distinction in 1981. He earned a law degree from Loyola Law School in 1985. I first met Ali in the 90s when I recommended him to President Clinton for the position of U.S. Attorney for the Central District of California. In that role, he tried numerous cases, from cybercrime to money laundering to immigration fraud. And given his stellar work and his own personal story as an immigrant from Cuba, President Obama nominated Mr. Mayorkas in 2009 to be Director of the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. In that role, Ali administered our immigration laws while preserving our legacy as a nation of immigrants. Ali successfully implemented the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program known as Daca. This program played a critical role and remains critical for hundreds of thousands of young people in this country. After 4 years at USCIS, he was confirmed in 2013 to be Deputy Secretary of Homeland Security, where he faced a broad array of challenges. He led the DHS response to the Ebola and Zika epidemics, oversaw the agency's effort to combat terrorism, and enhanced our border security. He also worked to facilitate trade and travel and enforced our immigration laws. Critically, given the threats we face today, he also oversaw and coordinated the government's efforts at cybersecurity. Mr. Chairman, the United States faces substantial security concerns and threats, and I just would like this committee to know that this senator has full confidence that Ali Mayorkas will provide positive leadership and strongly urge this committee to support his nomination. I thank you once again for your accommodations, and I would ask to be excused because I have another committee to attend.
Thank you, Senator Feinstein. We appreciate your introduction, and we'll now do the opening statements, and then we'll have the opportunity to hear from Mr. Mayorkas. Given the Homeland Security threats we face as a country, as Senator Feinstein just talked about, including the current increased threat level here in our nation's capital that all of us experienced as we came to the Capitol this morning, having the right person to lead the Department of Homeland Security could not be more important. This committee worked to create the Department of Homeland Security following the horrific events of September 11th, 2001. At the time, we were mainly concerned with foreign threats coming from outside our country's borders. As we sit here today with the Capitol complex surrounded by fencing and thousands of members of the National Guard all around us, the threats the Department is being tasked to protect us from are very different. While foreign threat actors remain a concern, the attack on the Capitol on January 6th was an assault on our democracy itself, in my view. And of course, it was a domestic attack. 20 years ago, such a threat was unimaginable. I think also unimaginable are the new ways foreign actors are breaching and accessing our sensitive government networks. The SolarWinds cybersecurity breach appears to be the first time a foreign actor, likely Russia, has had unfettered access to the daily workings of important federal agencies. This includes, by the way, the Department of Homeland Security, the very agency tasked with keeping the federal government's networks secure. At the same time, our country still struggles with threats posed by illicit drugs, like fentanyl, which Customs and Border Protection reports has shifted from entering our communities from China through the U.S. Postal Service to increasingly coming across our southern land border. All while our country is gripped by the COVID-19 pandemic that has now infected over 23 million Americans. The economic impact of the pandemic has also increased the risk of vulnerable populations being subject to human trafficking, another DHS focus. And all of us have seen reports of another caravan making its way north from Central America. Recently, the department has struggled due to a lack of Senate-confirmed leadership, really since April of 2019. Having the right person at the helm at DHS could not be more important. That person must be a strong leader with utmost integrity. Today, we consider Mr. Mayorkas for that post. This is not the first time Mr. Mayorkas has been before this committee as a nominee. In July 2013, this committee considered his nomination to be Deputy Secretary of DHS while he was under investigation by the Inspector General for exerting improper influence in the EB-5 investor visa process in his role as Director of U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. As a result, Mr. Mayorkas' nomination was reported out of this committee on a strict party line vote with no Republican support. He was later confirmed by the Senate in the same way, party line with no Republican support. Today, we have the findings of that Inspector General report, and they are concerning. The DHS Inspector General found that in 3 matters in the EB-5 program, and I quote, Mr. Mayorkas communicated with stakeholders on substantive issues outside of the normal adjudicatory process and intervened with career USCIS staff in ways that benefited the stakeholders. In each of these 3 instances, but for Mr. Mayorkas' intervention, the matter would have been decided differently. Further, the IG found, again, and I quote, the juxtaposition of Mr. Mayorkas' communication with external stakeholders on specific matters outside the normal procedures, coupled with favorable action that deviated from the regulatory scheme designed to ensure fairness and even-handedness in adjudicating benefits, created an appearance of favoritism and special access, end quote. That's from the IG. The stakeholders who received the benefit of this special access are familiar names: former Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid, Ed Rendell, Terry McAuliffe, and Anthony Rodham. And the projects included financing for a Las Vegas hotel and casino, Hollywood film studios, and an electric car manufacturing company. Equally concerning is the testimony from DHS whistleblowers regarding Mr. Mayorkas' management style. One witness stated that encounters with Mr. Mayorkas were uncomfortable, aggressive, unusual, and unsettling, unquote. And a high-ranking USCIS official told the IG that employees were afraid to speak up in meetings because they had a different view, that Mr. Mayorkas would, and I quote, cut them up, take them apart, or put them in their place, end quote. In fact, the Inspector General noted the number and variety of witnesses that came forward was unusual. The individuals who raised these concerns were, quote, throughout the ranks of USCIS in different locations, engaged in different functions with different experience levels, end quote. Mr. Mayorkas, I know from our conversations that you strongly disagree with this report. In preparing for this hearing, I reached out to John Roth, the former DHS Inspector General responsible for the report. It's worth noting that Mr. Roth was nominated by President Obama and confirmed by the Senate unanimously. Mr. Roth told me the report holds up today, and he continues to stand behind it. Mr. Mayorkas, I believe it is important that you are given the opportunity to address the findings of the report, and you will have that opportunity today. As you know, this committee strongly believes in the importance of the work of the Inspector General community. In fact, members of this committee, Senator Peters, Carper, Langford, Romney, and I introduced the Securing Inspector General Independence Act last Congress in response to concerning actions taken by the Trump administration. And I hope this committee takes up that legislation in this new Congress. At this hearing, it's also important that we talk about your plans for securing the country from existing threats, as well as those we haven't yet imagined, should you be confirmed. You and I have had a good conversation about those challenges as well, and I look forward to that dialogue. But ultimately, I believe this hearing is about ensuring strong, effective, and ethical leadership of the critically important and sprawling Department of Homeland Security, now the 3rd largest agency of the federal government. Leadership is required. I now turn to Senator Peters for his opening statement.
Well, thank you, first off, Senator Portman and Senator Johnson for convening today's hearing. Certainly do appreciate that. Our nation is facing serious threats and challenges at an unprecedented level now, and I appreciate your willingness to work in a bipartisan way to ensure that we can swiftly consider this important national security nomination. I'm looking forward to working with you, Senator Portman, to continue this committee's long-standing tradition of bipartisanship, strengthening our nation's security and helping to ensure that the government is working effectively for the American people. I'm also grateful for Alejandro Mayorkas and his family for joining us here today as we consider your nomination to be the Secretary of Homeland Security. And I thank you for your willingness to serve our country again. It certainly was an honor and privilege to meet your family before the hearing. As we talked about prior to the hearing, taking such an important job is a family affair, and it requires the support of a loving family, and I know you're blessed to have that. Mr. Mayorkas, once confirmed, you will have a daunting job before you, but you are a qualified and an experienced leader. And I look forward to hearing more about your plans to safeguard our national security today. There's no question we need strong and we need stable leadership in the Department of Homeland Security more than ever. Over the last 4 years, the department has endured some chaos, mismanagement, and instability. And as our third largest federal agency with more than 240,000 employees, DHS is in desperate need of principled leadership. The turmoil and uncertainty at DHS headquarters has only been compounded by the growing security threats that are facing our nation. In recent weeks, we saw a widespread cyber breach of our federal government and a terrible attack on the Capitol building, all while we continue to battle a raging pandemic that's taking the lives of thousands of Americans. So whether it's bolstering cybersecurity, combating the rise of domestic terrorism, including white supremacist and anti-government violence, controlling the coronavirus pandemic, or tackling longer-term threats like climate change, our nation needs an experienced Homeland Security Secretary. Mr. Mayorkas, your record as a national security official is extensive. You have the support of former Homeland Security secretaries and law enforcement organizations, including the Fraternal Order of the Police. You have also been entrusted to help lead the department before and have been confirmed by the Senate 3 times. In those roles, you led efforts to protect the homeland from both foreign and domestic terrorism, strengthening our nation's cybersecurity, and increased cooperation between the federal government and local law enforcement agencies. And your role as the Deputy Secretary gives you very unique qualifications to take the reins of this extensive agency. Today's hearing is an important opportunity for me and my colleagues to ask questions about your record. And I look forward to hearing more about how you plan to lead the department. We have recently lived through some of our nation's darkest moments, but I'm confident there is light and hope all across the country. Our committee must work thoroughly and quickly to fully evaluate your credentials and then put in place Senate-confirmed leadership at the top of the Department of Homeland Security. Thank you again for your willingness to serve and for being with us here today. I look forward to having a comprehensive discussion about how all of us can work together to address the serious and pressing issues facing our nation and your efforts to help strengthen our national security in the years ahead. And Mr. Chairman, as testament to the confidence of many around the country, I have here a number of statements in support of Mr. Mayorkas from law enforcement, faith and nonprofit, labor, humanitarian, and fire community organizations. So without objection, I'd like to enter these 25 statements into the record.
Without objection. Before we hear from Mr. Mayorkas, I understand we have a second introduction of Mr. Mayorkas, this one from Senator Jon Tester, who will do so virtually.
Portman, it is indeed a pleasure for me to be here in front of you and the Homeland Security Committee to introduce my friend, Ali Mayorkas. Ali is President Biden's choice to head up the Department of Homeland Security. I don't need to tell the people on this committee how big of a job this is, but you need to have somebody that's up to the task to get it done. Ali Mayorkas is that man. I worked with Ali when he was Deputy Secretary under the Obama administration. I was able to bring him to Montana. We were able to tour the border. We were able to do public meetings. And Ali Mayorkas is somebody who people respect. He demands respect, and he can bring people together. But most importantly, he understands the challenges that this country faces. both from our foreign adversaries and now more than ever from our domestic ones. This job's important. We've seen this department in turmoil over the last 4 years with 6 different secretaries. Ali Mayorkas will bring the kind of steady hand that this department needs. I'm going to tell you, when Ali asked me to introduce him, I thought to myself, words can't do this man justice. This is somebody that was made for public service. He spent most of his career in the Department of Homeland Security. He understands the challenges. He understands it's going to take a lot of work. He understands we're going to have to bring people together. And he understands that this is a 24/7 job. I would hope that this committee would kick out Ali Mayorkas, pass him out, better term, pass him out, and get him to the Senate floor so he can get confirmed. Because honestly, after the events on January 6th, we have no time to waste. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Senator Tester. Our witness this morning is Alejandro Mayorkas. President-elect Biden plans to nominate Mr. Mayorkas to be Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security. Mr. Mayorkas previously served as the Deputy Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, as well as the Director of the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. It's a custom of this committee, Ms. Mayorkas, to swear in all the witnesses. So at this time, I'd ask you to please stand and raise your right hand. Do you swear the testimony you will give before this committee will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Noting that the witness is answered in the affirmative, your written testimony, Mr. Mayorkas, will be printed in the record in its entirety, and we would now ask you to try to limit your oral testimony to 5 minutes. Please begin when you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Ranking Member, members of the Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee. I am honored to appear before you as the nominee to be the next Secretary of the United States Department of Homeland Security. It would be the greatest privilege of my life to return to the department and lead the nearly 240,000 men and women who dedicate their talent and energy to the safety and security of our nation. I appear before you not alone, but with and because of my family. My wife, Tanya, and our beautiful daughters, Giselle and Mimi, enable and inspire me to serve. They understand that my heart is in government service. They are the heart of my heart, and I say to them, I love you. The principles of homeland and security have been tremendously important in shaping my life. My father and mother brought me to this country to escape communism and to provide me with the security, opportunity, and pride that American citizenship brings to each of us. I was raised to appreciate each day what this country has meant for our family and the blessing it is to know it as our homeland. The love for this country that I learned from my parents only made the January 6th attack on our capital all the more horrifying. If I should have the honor of being confirmed, I will do everything I can to ensure that the tragic loss of life, the assault on law enforcement, the desecration of the building that stands as one of the 3 pillars of our democracy, the terror that you felt, your colleagues, staff, and everyone present will not happen again. The Department of Homeland Security bears an extraordinary weight on behalf of the American people, the weight of grave challenges seen and unseen, cyber attacks that undermine our security and the integrity of our information systems, the threat of both foreign and domestic terrorism, pandemics like the one that we are living through now that throw every part of American life off of its axis, and extreme weather events that threaten lives and livelihoods. This is to say nothing of maintaining border security, providing humanitarian relief, protecting our critical infrastructure, or the many other responsibilities that the department fulfills each and every day. If I have the privilege of serving as secretary, I will work day and night to support the department's great workforce and ensure that it is able to execute its responsibilities successfully with honor and dignity. I will dedicate myself to equipping the department's men and women with the tools and resources they need and providing them with the opportunities they deserve. I will do so in partnership with you and with the other members of Congress and with the department's many other critical partners throughout our country. The Department of Homeland Security is fundamentally a department of partnerships. To combat the threat of terrorism, the department must work with our international partners, other federal agencies, state, local, tribal, and territorial governments, and our nation's noble first responders. To enhance our cybersecurity, the department depends upon and must strengthen its cooperation with the private sector. To be prepared for and resilient to natural disasters, the department must work with state, local, tribal, and territorial governments and our brave local fire and emergency personnel. To facilitate and enhance our travel and trade, it must innovate and align its research and development with the efforts of private industry and academic institutions. To meet the challenges and the opportunities of migration, it needs to collaborate with other nations, international organizations, and nonprofit service providers. To succeed, the department must work with the many communities it serves. This committee and your colleagues in the Senate and the House of Representatives are at the forefront of the department's partners. We must work closely with you as you help determine the funding upon which the department relies, promulgate the laws that it is charged to enforce, and provide the oversight that ensures its accountability to the American people. As your partner, the department must be collaborative, open and transparent, and at all times forthright with you, even in times of disagreement. If I am confirmed as the next secretary, the department will meet its responsibilities to you. I began in government service as a federal prosecutor. After more than 8 years trying cases before juries, I served for 3 years as a Senate-confirmed United States attorney. As a prosecutor, the law and the facts of a case were my foundation and my guide, and they have remained my North Star ever since. I have worked in support of federal agents and officers, local law enforcement, firefighters, and emergency medical technicians. I have worked in support of all the men and women throughout the Department of Homeland Security and in public service who work in and even rush into harm's way to protect us all. I have not for a single moment lost sight of what a privilege and honor it is to do so, nor of the obligations it carries on our nation's behalf. I look forward to continuing that service. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayorkas. We will now have 7-minute rounds, and my pattern is normally to, as a chair, to go straight to others because we have a good mix of Republicans and Democrats who are lined up to speak, but there are some things that I think are important to address. So I'm going to take some time here at the beginning as well. Before we get started, there are 3 questions the committee asks of every nominee, and for the record, let me just ask you to respond to each one quickly. First, is there anything you are aware of in your background that might present a conflict of interest with the duties of the office to which you have been nominated?
No.
Second, do you know of anything personal or otherwise that would in any way prevent you from fully and honorably discharging the responsibilities of the office to which you have been nominated?
No.
And finally, do you agree without reservation to comply with any request or summons to appear and testify before any duly constituted committee of Congress, if you are confirmed?
Yes.
Thank you for those answers. Again, there's lots to discuss today, and I look forward to a dialogue on some of the Homeland Security challenges we face and your proposals to deal with those. But let's go straight to the issues raised by this DHS Inspector General's report on decisions you made during the time you were Director of the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. The report documented how you intervened in these 3 cases related to the EB-5 investor visa program. This is where people are given a visa with the understanding that they'll come and invest in the United States and create jobs. A few specific questions. The Inspector General, in the case of LA Films Regional Center involving Ed Rendell, stated that you, and I quote, created a deference review board staffed with individuals you handpicked to review a separate series of Time Warner movie projects. This board did not previously exist and was never used again after it voted to reverse the adjudicator's proposed denials. Remarkably, there's no record of the proceedings of this board. Now, that's from the IG report. First, is that accurate? And second, how do you explain that there was no record of the proceedings of the board?
Mr. Chairman, thank you for the opportunity to answer your question and address that aspect of the Inspector General's report. And I should say at the outset, Mr. Chairman, that I have tremendous respect for the system of Inspectors General. They provide tremendous value to the agencies and departments throughout the federal government, and the opportunity for leaders to improve the organizations that they oversee. And I have always cooperated with the Inspector General's report, including this Inspector General of the Department of Homeland Security. Senator, there's an underlying principle to your question, which I will articulate and then answer your question specifically. And that is that when a leader enters federal service with the authority to fix problems, that leader has the responsibility to fix problems, and that is what I did. And the EB-5 investor visa program that USCIS, U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, administered was plagued by problems. And I heard about those problems almost every single day that I served as the director, and I heard about them from both sides of the aisle in every corner of the business community that the agency served. And one of those problems was a very significant one, which was when the agency made a decision in an EB-5 investor visa case, and millions of dollars of investor capital and the creation of jobs for U.S. workers was dependent upon that decision, was it fair for the agency to later in the adjudicative process change its mind and kill the business development that was designed to infuse capital into economically disadvantaged areas and create jobs for Americans? And so I created the Deference Review Board as but one fix to the many problems that we encountered in that agency. And that fix was an institutional reform that was supposed to endure throughout the life of the EB-5 program office that I created. And when I read the Inspector General's report, that was the first time that I learned that the Deference Review Board had not been gathered together after the case that you mentioned, and the fact that during the case that you mentioned, a record had not been kept. And if I had remained the director of U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, rather than having assumed the responsibilities of becoming the Deputy Secretary of Homeland Security, I would have ensured that the Deference Review Board continued and its proper record-keeping practices were adhered to.
Okay, as Deputy Secretary, didn't you have the opportunity to do exactly that, to be able to ensure that in a management role as Deputy Secretary that the visa program was working at the Deference Review Board was properly functioning?
Mr. Chairman, when I became the Deputy Secretary of Homeland Security, we instituted reforms in response to the Inspector General's report to ensure that the integrity and the ethics of our leaders were well understood by the workforce and the public that we serve. I delegated responsibility to the management of the EB-5 program to the new Director of U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services that led it.
The DHS IG report also explains how you intervened in a denial related to Gulf Coast Regional Center, where Terry McAuliffe was chairman of the board and Anthony Rodham, former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton's brother, was the CEO. The report documents how both men contacted you about the denial. The report states that you personally reviewed the denial decision before it was issued, disagreed with its finding, and indicated you would rewrite the decision yourself. Witnesses testified all of these actions were outside the normal adjudicatory process. One, is this accurate? And two, if so, why did you go outside the normal course?
Senator, let me share, if I may, something with you about the EB-5 investor visa program and the agency of U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. USCIS, as it is commonly known, is an agency that adjudicates cases. That's what it does. It addresses the applications for immigration benefits that millions and millions of people submit to it each and every day. And so when I had the authority and therefore the responsibility to fix problems, I fixed problems through the cases that the agency handled. The case that you mentioned and the 3 cases that are cited in the Inspector General's report are 3 of hundreds and hundreds of cases that I became involved in at the request of senators and members of the House of Representatives on both sides of the aisle. And I must say, Senator, take issue with the use of the term intervene. It is my job to become involved, to learn the problems that an agency confronts, to become involved in those problems, and to fix them. And that's what I did in this case and the many cases that came before me that were presented to me on both sides of the aisle. And I find it my responsibility to be responsive to members of Congress on a bipartisan basis, and I commit to you that I will honor that obligation should I be confirmed as the next Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security.
Final question, what did you learn? These were politically connected individuals where you were in direct contact with them, going around the typical adjudicatory process. Did you have concerns that your actions might be viewed as favoritism and special access? And what did you learn that helped you as a Deputy Secretary and would help you should you be confirmed as Secretary?
Senator, I learned something very important from this report, and it is for that reason that I am grateful for it. And I should say that as an individual, both in my personal life and my professional life, I learn, and I learn each and every day to be better tomorrow than I am today. And that is a commitment that I carry forward throughout my life. I learned that individuals in the EB-5 investor visa program, and therefore in the agency, may not have full visibility of all that I am involved in and all of which I do as a leader, and therefore they may take a slice of my action and gather misperceptions of what fuels me as a leader and what drives me as a government servant. Because if I may, Senator, these weren't the only 3 cases I was involved in. There were dozens and dozens, whether they involved the rich or the poor, the enfranchised or the disenfranchised. I became involved to ensure that our agency improved each day, that I learned of the problems that we were confronted with, and that I did everything to fix them. I don't take these jobs, Senator. I don't drive to be a government servant and serve the American public to cut ribbons around the country and have fun. I work really hard. And I have worked really, really hard throughout my nearly 20 years of government service to bring honor to the office that I have been privileged to occupy.
Thank you. Senator Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Mayorkas, thank you again for your answers to those questions. Mr. Mayorkas, the COVID-19 pandemic is, without question, the crisis of our time, and we must dedicate every effort to overcoming it. DHS has played an integral role in COVID-19 response thus far with FEMA staff managing the logistics and the medical supply acquisition and distribution. CBP officers have been identifying counterfeit medical products, and CISA is safeguarding COVID-19 vaccines from both physical and cyber attacks. However, as you're well aware, there's still much more work to be done. So my question to you, sir, is if confirmed, what would be your priorities to ensure the expansive resources of the department can further advance our nation's response to COVID-19 crisis?
Ranking Member Peters, the COVID-19 A pandemic is one of the greatest challenges that we in the Department of Homeland Security and across the federal government, and quite frankly, as we all know too well throughout our entire nation, must confront. And the Department of Homeland Security has significant capabilities to bring to bear in that fight, in execution of the President-elect's ambitious and visionary vision for putting this pandemic once and for all behind us. The Federal Emergency Management Administration, FEMA, as it is commonly called, has tremendous reach through its 10 regional offices throughout the country in ensuring that the supply chain is effectively executed to bring the needed relief, the needed equipment, and the needed vaccines to the American public. The Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA, as it is commonly known, has the awesome responsibility of protecting that supply chain from cyber attacks and ensuring that the work of the other offices and agencies in the Department of Homeland Security are executed without threat from either foreign or domestic actors. The reach of the department is significant, and I hope I have the privilege of leading the department to bring this COVID-19 challenge to rest, put it behind us, and let us prosper in the days ahead.
Mr. Mayorkas, this committee in the days, weeks, and months ahead will take a look at how we responded to this crisis, to see what worked and what did not work, and then make sure that we are better prepared for a future crisis. My question to you generally now is, in your opinion, in seeing how the department has responded to this crisis, what do you think are some of the biggest lessons that were learned from the pandemic response?
Senator, let me say that I look forward to studying the performance of the Department of Homeland Security and the execution of its responsibilities to tackle the COVID-19 pandemic, and I look forward to doing so, working closely with you, with this committee, on a bipartisan basis. I look forward to understanding whether the mandate to the Department of Homeland Security remain consistent, clear, and well-defined throughout the many months that we have been battling COVID-19, to make sure that the department's resources have been exploited to the fullest extent possible in the best meaning of that term, and that, in fact, its responsibilities were executed efficiently and effectively. I look forward to working with this committee to study how the department performed and what more it can do in battling the pandemic.
Well, I'm happy to hear that, because there's no question that the oversight of the government's response to COVID crisis is going to be a top priority of this committee going forward. And my question to you is, if confirmed, will you commit to providing this committee with all the documents, information, and access to individuals with knowledge as we conduct this critical oversight?
I do.
Mr. Mayorkas, I have far too often met with resistance in my attempt to conduct an investigation into the threats of white supremacists and domestic terrorists in our communities. The Trump administration did not do an adequate job in addressing this very real threat, and our threat that we saw played out in black churches, mosques, and synagogues over the last few years. I can tell you that African American, Arab American, and Jewish families in Michigan, as well as all across the country, are relying on this new administration to keep them safe where they live, work, and they pray. If confirmed, what steps will you take to tackle this persistent and growing threat to our nation?
Senator Peters, Ranking Member Peters, two very important points. One, I commit to you that if I am confirmed as the next Secretary of Homeland Security, the department will be open, transparent, and responsive to this committee on a bipartisan basis, number one. Number two, the threat of domestic extremism is one of the greatest challenges that the Department of Homeland Security confronts, and it has unique capabilities in confronting that challenge. Its Office of Intelligence and Analysis is a critical partner with state and local, tribal and territorial governments in gathering information and intelligence about the threat that we face here at home and disseminating that information so that our brave and noble first responders are best equipped to tackle it. I look forward to playing a critical role in empowering the Office of Intelligence and Analysis in an apolitical, nonpartisan way to do its important job and tackle the threat that domestic extremism is today.
Mr. Mayor, the events of January 6th have renewed calls for increased prosecutorial and investigative powers to respond to domestic terrorism. Additional powers could be duplicative and harmful to the very communities that we seek to protect, including nearly 300,000 Arab Americans in my state that have been targets of hate crimes and discriminatory counterterrorism policies. The federal government already has authorities to effectively investigate and prosecute domestic terrorism, but unfortunately it has failed to prioritize those existing resources to counter the obvious, the open and growing threat from anti-government, white supremacist, conspiracy-oriented, and other violent extremist groups. My question to you is, will you commit today to prioritizing existing statutes and resources to combat white supremacist violence and undertake the extensive consultation with me and leaders of the Arab American and other minority communities before pursuing new domestic terrorism authorities to prevent future attacks, if confirmed?
Yes, Ranking Member Peters, I will.
Thank you.
I should say, if I may, sir, that when I was the United States Attorney for the Central District of California, I created, for the first time in the office's history, a civil rights section to focus on the prosecution of hate crimes, which was a growing problem back in the late 90s.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Mayorkas, welcome back. In the 6 years under my chairmanship, this committee held dozens, I think well over 3 dozen hearings on the problems at the border. And that was really sparked by what happened in 2014 when President Obama declared a humanitarian crisis when we had the surge of unaccompanied children as well as family units come across the border illegally. One of the things I certainly did, and I didn't have time to blow these things up, but I started developing charts to kind of lay out the problem. What I'd like to do is go through a little bit, get some quick responses from you in terms of the history of this. I know Senator Feinstein credited you with the Daca program. I've been arguing, I think accurately, that the Daca program, as beneficial it is for people and addresses a particular problem, also was used as a catalyst by coyotes and created the surge that produced that 2014 humanitarian crisis where 137,000 people in total, unaccompanied children and family units crossed this border illegally, and we had to deal with that. And the Obama administration recognized that, and you were Deputy Secretary at that point in time. Just quick answer these questions. In reaction to that, it is true that the Obama administration built the facility in McAllen, Texas, correct?
Yes, sir.
And that's the same facility that has the chain link fences that people on the other side of the aisle have referred to as putting children in cages, correct?
Yes, sir.
You started that detention process because you recognize this is a problem. So you started detaining those families and those unaccompanied children, correct?
Senator, the detention establishment in Immigration and Customs Enforcement existed long before I became deputy.
But you continued. You detained individuals, correct? Correct?
We detained individuals as part of the Immigration and Customs Enforcement operation.
Precisely.
Yes.
You also separated children from the adults that they arrived here, correct? There were children separated from parents back in 2014, correct? Just yes or no?
Senator Johnson, when I was the Deputy Secretary of Homeland Security, I explicitly rejected the proposal to separate families.
But it occurred, correct?
Senator, I can't speak to that, and I would look forward.
Regardless, the enforcement actions the Obama administration took actually had an impact. We went from 137,000 down to 80,000 in 2015, but then a court reinterpreted the Flores decision and included accompanied children for those same protections. And you can take a look at the result. It took a little while for people to realize how they could exploit that problem, to the point in 2019 we had 608,000 people arriving and coming to this country illegally, basically apprehended and then released and dispersed through this country. That was a real problem. And this administration addressed it with the MPP program, different agreements with Central America, and we dramatically saw a decrease in the amount of people coming in here, risking their lives in a very dangerous journey. We saw a dramatic decrease well before COVID. Another chart we have is average daily entries, illegal entries per month. You can see we hit a peak in May of 2019. Again, this is when the administration, this current administration, started implementing solutions to the problem. And by and large, we dramatically decreased that. What's been happening over the last few months is we've had a dramatic increase now in terms of single adults coming here. And we see a 9,000-person caravan coming from Honduras. And they're very open in terms of why they're doing it, because President-elect Biden has stated in the debates that we're not going to deport anybody in the first 100 days, so they're going to take advantage of that opportunity. So I guess my questions for you is, Secretary Johnson, who you served under, said that 1,000 people per day was a bad day. We have been consistently over 2,000 a day for the last number of years, over 4,000 a day in March 2019. Right now we're back over 2,000 per day. Do you consider that a problem? What is going to be a bad day if you're Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security of illegal entry?
Senator Johnson, I've had the privilege of addressing these issues with you before, when I was served as the Deputy Secretary of Homeland Security, and candidly, of course, several weeks ago when I became the nominee to be the next Secretary of Homeland Security. I look forward to studying the data with you and actually being open and transparent with you. And
okay, but again, what will 1,000 a day be a bad day, or is 2,000 acceptable? Is 3,000 acceptable? What's going to be a bad day on your watch?
Senator,
just pick a number.
Senator, I look forward to.
Okay, I don't have time for. Okay, so next question: do you believe coming into this country illegally for economic improvement, is that a valid asylum claim?
Senator, the asylum laws are well established, and they provide that an individual who's fleeing persecution by reason of his or her member in a particular social group is deserving of protection.
Okay, but coming here for economic gain is not a valid asylum claim. Is that? Would you agree with that?
Senator, I believe I articulated the legal theory,
okay. Will you commit to provide this center, this committee, the type of data, at least the data we got, so I can continue to monitor what's happening at the border? So I have full information so we can really see what's happening based on whatever policies you implement.
Yes, I committed to you that I would do so when we last spoke, and I commit to you now.
Do you also commit to enforcing our current immigration laws?
I do.
Fully enforcing them. Okay, just real quick, I know Senator Portman did a pretty good job of talking about the EB-5 and the Office of Inspector General report. I would ask this committee, I received a letter from Senator Grassley with about 138 pages of documentation. I'd ask that be entered in the record. I'd also ask that the report by the Office of Inspector General be entered in the record. And I just have a couple quick questions. The main problem, and I'm assuming you got that letter from Senator Grassley dated January 15, 2021?
Yes, Senator.
Have you responded to that?
I'm about to, Senator.
I think, again, there's a lot of detail in here. A lot of your testimony was contradicted by what you've done. You said you're supportive, transparent, and being forthright with this committee. Senator Grassley, in a letter, is one of the attachments, August 23, 2013, his main issue in writing the letter to you is you have not been forthright. You have not answered questions dating back to his oversight letters of 2013. But one of the points he makes in this August 23, 2013 letter is the questions for the record response is in direct contradiction of your hearing testimony. He goes on to say, this contradicted what you had previously told my staff, which was you were never involved in individual cases. So again, I would just ask the members of this committee in evaluating this nomination to seriously take a look at this letter from Senator Grassley with his exhibits that I've now entered into the record. There's some pretty troubling issues raised by Senator Grassley. I don't know that you want to quick respond to that. I'm out of time.
I would very much like to, if I may, Senator and Mr. Chairman, may I respond to that? I became involved in a lot of cases. Because as I said, the work of U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services is casework. And I did my job. And I learned of problems and I fixed them. As a matter of fact, one of the areas in which I became very involved is in the area of international adoptions. And I learned of that area, and I learned of the problems that afflicted it, because Senator Grassley brought a case to my attention involving an international adoption that had become stuck in a bureaucratic nightmare. And I jumped in, and I learned about what was going on in our international adoption system at the request of Senator Grassley. And I learned a lot from becoming involved in that case. And then Senator Grassley's concerns were echoed by Senator Landrieu, who called me one day and said that we are stuck in moving orphan children in Guatemala to their welcoming homes and families in the United States. And I created a task force to look into that and to tackle it. And I traveled to Guatemala 3 times to see what I could do with government leaders in that country to work through the bureaucratic nightmare that was causing tremendous suffering on the behalf of children who were looking for homes, and a humble, faithful American families that had opened their homes and their families to those children that didn't have anything. And I became involved in those cases, and I fixed that problem. And the international adoptions from Guatemala began to move. And I brought justice to the case that Senator Grassley presented to me. And I did so based on the facts and the law and nothing more. And I keep to this day the letter of thanks from Senator Grassley for my involvement in that case. I remember with great pride my attendance at an affair with Senator Grassley and Senator Landrieu to celebrate the humble and faithful American families that opened their homes to children in need. And I have to this day a photograph of an orphan child running through an airport with a big smile on his face because he's about to be embraced by his American family that has opened their home to him. And that is not the case of the rich and the powerful. That is the case of the poor and the disenfranchised. I got involved in a lot of cases, and I did right by the cases I got involved in, and the Inspector General did not take issue with the disposition of the cases in which I became involved, because I studied the law and I followed the facts, and that is my North Star, and it always has been. And any suggestion to the contrary is incorrect.
Senator Carper.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Ali, welcome back to hearing before our committee. I want to thank Tanya, your wife. I want to thank your daughters, Giselle and Mimi, for their willingness to share you with the American people and all these roles that you've been privileged to play. Ali Mayorkas is an American success story. Fled Cuba at a young age with his family, left everything, came here for the hope of living a better life, and has done remarkable things. He's one of those people who feels that given the gifts that he's gotten from becoming a citizen of this country, he has an obligation to give back, and he has given back again and again and again. We've seen this movie before. This EB-5 movie, we've seen it before. We saw it 7 years ago. It was fully discussed and fully litigated. Let me just say, every one of us as a United States Senator can think of a time, probably many times, when folks that we represent, they could have been business people, they could have been folks of nonprofit organizations, could be governors, they were lost in a bureaucratic tangle. This is a big government we have. And it's easy to get things messed up. And sometimes that happens, and we're expected as the representatives from our states to stand up for people and try to straighten things out. As much as anything, that's what Ali's been accused of all those years ago. And I just want to say this. Most of the folks that are on our committee today were not in the Senate in 2013, I don't think. And I was chairman of this committee. I was chairman of this committee, and I remember very well the effort to smear this man's character based on a 2013 Inspector General investigation, which was leaked to the press a day before his confirmation hearing, serious violation of IG protocol. Following that, the claims were fully investigated by a subsequent Inspector General, and Mr. Mayorkas was found to be guilty of one thing, and that's creating an appearance of favoritism. If we were to be honest with one another, every single member of this committee and in the Senate could be accused of the same thing at one time or another. We're trying to do really the right thing. And what's more, the IG who initiated this investigation and who was responsible for the original leaks in 2013 resigned later that year, resigned under allegations of misconduct. He was charged last year with fraud. If anyone still has any doubts, then they should read the final IG report, including Mr. Mayorkas' 32-page response for themselves. To allow these unfunded allegations to cloud Ali Mayorkas' unblemished career in public service at a time when this department so critically needs principled leadership, capable leadership, I think is irresponsible at best and dangerous at worst. Mr. Mayorkas, everything I do, I know I can do better. And I'm going to just ask you to talk to us about what you did to improve the morale of the workforce at the Department of Homeland Security and especially at USCIS. What did you do to improve it? And did it ever improve under your leadership?
Senator Carper, thank you very much. I was very proud of the fact that the employee morale at U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services improved under my leadership, and that the morale of the men and women of the Department of Homeland Security improved during my tenure as the Deputy Secretary and under Secretary Johnson's leadership. I prioritized the morale of the men and women of the Department of Homeland Security and the agency that I led in the first term of the prior administration. We focused on equipping the workforce with the tools they needed to perform their jobs ably and in a manner in which they could be proud of. We created opportunities for them to advance in their careers and fulfill their highest ambitions. I can be granular in some of the recommendations and some of the fixes that we implemented, but let me just speak to the fact that if indeed I have the privilege of serving as the Secretary of Homeland Security, I will make the well-being and morale of the brave and noble men and women of the department my highest priority.
Let me thank you, Ali. Let me just say, colleagues, when Ali Mayorkas and Jay Johnson were confirmed to lead the Department of Homeland Security for the last 4 years of the Obama administration, what they found at the Department of Homeland Security, as some of you recall, was, I call it leadership by Swiss cheese. We had so many people in acting positions that were unfilled in leadership. And Tom Colbert and I worked together with a lot of our colleagues at the time to make sure that we fill those positions at hearings, voted, confirmed people, and then conducted the oversight that we're expected to conduct. My colleagues will recall that about every year there is a survey that's done of major departments within the federal government with respect to morale. Year after year after year, the Department of Homeland Security was dead last. The last year that Ali Mayorkas and Jay Johnson led this department, my recollection is it was the department that had the best improvement in their final year of their leadership. I'd ask us to keep that in mind. Ali, one of our colleagues has raised the issue of illegal immigration, people coming across our border. You and I have been down to Central America. We've been down to Honduras, Guatemala, and Salvador. We found over the years there's 3 reasons why people come out of those countries to get to our country, and one is we make their lives miserable. Our addiction to drugs, illegal drugs, and the trafficking of those drugs through those countries just creates power and money for criminal units. And what we have done is basically, after putting these people in those countries in a terrible situation, basically we build a wall to keep them out when they're trying to get here. There's something called the Alliance for Prosperity, which creates 3 buckets for us to put money into the federal government, other countries, foundations, nonprofits, in order to go after crime and corruption, to try to make sure that there's economic opportunity for people. And that's what we've done through the Alliance for Prosperity. You know what? It works because we go after root causes. Would you comment on this, please, going forward?
Senator Carper, President-elect Biden and Vice President-elect Harris have put forth a bold vision for addressing the root causes of irregular migration from the Northern Triangle countries. One cannot overstate the push factor, why individuals seek to leave their country of origin, their homes, because of extraordinary violence, because of corruption, because of extreme poverty, because of persecution. We must address the root causes to solve the problem in the Western Hemisphere, in our region specifically. That is what President-elect Biden's vision does, and I hope I have the privilege to execute it as the Secretary.
Mr. Chairman, if I could, just in closing, if any of us lived in those three countries and had to put up with the crime and corruption, the lack of economic opportunity, we try to get out of there as well. If we would come to the kind of a wonderful country that Ali Mayorkas and his family came to all those years ago, they want to stay in their countries. We have an opportunity in this new administration to make sure they have something worth staying for. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Langford.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to take off my mask since I don't have anybody within 15 feet of me at this point. So, Mayor, thank you again for stepping up in your service again in this process. Let me run through just some very quick questions for you. I've got quite a few to be able to run through, but a lot of these are just getting some things out of the way. Will you protect the rights of whistleblowers, access to the Inspector General, in cooperation with this committee if you're the Secretary of Homeland Security?
Yes, I always have and will continue to do so.
Thank you. Do you see your role, and this is a perspective issue, do you see your role as the leader of DHS as the leader of a law enforcement agency or a law interpretation or reinterpretation agency?
The Department of Homeland Security is charged with enforcing the laws that Congress passes.
Thank you. If there's someone in the administration that pushes you, encourages you to not enforce the law or to ignore the law as the Secretary of Homeland Security, what would be your response to them?
I am an officer of the court. I always have been.
You've heard the statement before, and you and I have talked about it before. Would you recommend that ICE be defunded?
No.
Does ICE need actually additional support?
Senator, there I will have to study the condition of Immigration and Customs Enforcement, how efficiently and effectively it is using its resources, and how it is best serving the American public. That requires my study.
We'll look forward to getting a chance to get a follow-up on that study. Would you recommend any of the physical barriers along our southern border be dismantled or removed?
Senator, I haven't looked at that specific question. I will share with you the fact that I agree with the approach that then Senator McCain, an American hero in my family and in this country, that Senator McCain took to the border, which is, it's not a monolithic challenge, the border. The border is varied depending on the geography, depending on the specific venue, and depending on the conduct of individuals around it. And we don't need, nor should we have, a monolithic answer to that varied and diverse challenge.
Right. I would assume that it's 2,000-mile-long border. We've got many areas that are mountainous, open desert areas. That I would fully agree. Don't need a physical barrier. We have lots of sight lines there. We can do it with other technology, other enforcement means on that. Is there any area of the border that you would see now that still needs additional repair for physical barriers, additional increase in technology, or would need an expansion of physical barriers?
Senator, I look forward to studying that because I am well aware of the challenges that the border presents. I am very well aware of the fact, as Senator Johnson alluded to, that traffickers are seeking to exploit the border, and not only to move people across it illegally, but to move contraband, to move fentanyl. The narco traffickers have sought to exploit the current challenge of the COVID-19 pandemic, and I look forward to studying the border to make sure that those challenges are repelled.
The border agents that I've spoken to there along the border tell me of two things on physical barriers. One is it slows people down so they're able to interdict as they're trying to climb the wall, get around the wall, get under the wall. they're able to get access to those individuals and be able to interdict faster in that sense. So it becomes a deterrent. It also pushes people towards the point of entry where they can manage those families and individuals a lot easier in that sense, in a more reasonable environment rather than being in a very remote area. So I look forward to that ongoing conversation. You and Senator Johnson had an interchange back and forth on this very straightforward question. Is economic opportunity a valid reason for asylum? You quoted the asylum statute on that, but I guess the yes or no question on that is economic opportunity doesn't seem to be in the statute as a valid reason for asylum. So I guess the question I have for you still is economic opportunity a reason that should be added to it? It's not there. Do you believe it's there?
Senator, I'm a lawyer by profession, so I take a look at the laws and I enforce them as both a lawyer and as a law enforcement officer for nearly 20 years of my career. When one speaks of economic opportunity, what does one mean? Just generally an opportunity to make a better living? If that is what you are referring to, that my understanding is that does not a legitimate asylum claim make.
And that's our understanding of the law as well. And it seems a pretty plain reading of it that if someone is coming here to increase their economic opportunity, obviously almost any country in the world, any city you live in the world, there's improved opportunities in the United States. And we're grateful for that in the United States. But just saying, hey, you don't have a lot of economic opportunities where you live doesn't mean you open up our borders for asylum claims or to say we're going to somehow release you into the United States and debate it. There's been an ongoing conversation about how to be able to manage that and how to be able to do it. Let me ask you a difficult question that's going to be hard to be able to interpret at this point because you haven't faced it yet, but pretty likely will in the days ahead. As the leader of DHS, it's pretty likely you're going to have thousands of people coming across the border in a migrant caravan from Honduras pretty rapidly. What message would you want to give to those folks right now that are traveling north in that migrant caravan to be able to send a message to them that if you're confirmed as the Secretary of Homeland Security, this is the message they need to hear about when they arrive in the United States?
Senator, let me say at the outset that this is not the first caravan that has apparently approached the border over the last 4 years or
It's not.
over the last 12 years. The phenomenon of a caravan is something that we have confronted in the Department of Homeland Security for many years. I think President-elect Biden and people who will be joining his incoming administration have spoken about the fact that there is a commitment to follow our asylum laws, to enforce our asylum laws, and that means to provide humanitarian relief for those individuals who qualify for it under the law. That cannot be accomplished with just the flick of a switch and turned on day one, that it will take time to build the infrastructure and capacity so that we can enforce our laws as Congress intended. And that would be the message I would send.
So let me ask this. The Title 42 authority is being currently used at our southern border right now because of the COVID risk. We have 21 of our officers and agents that have died because of COVID, trying to be able to interdict individuals that they then acquired COVID and have died in the line of duty. It's been incredibly difficult on the entire department on that, to be able to watch that. As you go through the memorial to agents listing that's out there for DHS, you see 2020 as a year where we just have all of those agents listed out there, and you realize the pain of what's really occurred in this time period. Do you anticipate changing the Title 42 authorities that currently exist to be able to protect our agents and individuals in the United States from individuals traveling from very high-profile COVID areas? Do you anticipate changing that?
Senator, I appreciate the question very much, and I'm very well aware of the loss of life of our brave frontline personnel. I have met with the Border Patrol Council that represents the Border Patrol agents. I have met with the NTEU, the organization that represents Customs and Border Protection's office personnel. I am very proud of the fact that both organizations have supported my nomination, and I look forward to studying Title 42 authorities, what they provide, and I can say this unequivocally, that our highest priority is to protect the health and well-being of the American public.
I would hope that we wouldn't have different rules for people flying in from Honduras than we have illegally traveling from Honduras. Because right now we have pretty strict travel restrictions coming in if you're flying in legally, and if somehow we have a different set of rules that's lax if you're traveling here illegally, that would be quite a quandary for us to be able to explain to everyone how the rule of law prevails. So thank you for stepping up. There is a lot to be able to do, and I look forward to our ongoing conversation.
Thank you, Senator.
Senator Hassan.
Mr. Chair, I was going to switch places with Senator Sinema, who has a scheduling issue, if that's all right with you.
That's understandable. And Senator Sinema, are you with us?
I am. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank Senator Hassan for her kindness. I appreciate it. So thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing today, and I appreciate that Mr. Mayorkas is joining us today. It's critical that the Department of Homeland Security has a Senate-confirmed leadership as quickly as possible. So my questions today will focus on several topics related to border security and immigration, which are key issues in my state of Arizona, and I also hope to discuss a cybersecurity issue. I remain committed to finding bipartisan and common sense solutions to secure Arizona's border and protect the public health and safety while also treating migrants fairly and humanely. So, Mr. Mayorkas, my first question for you. DHS faces a critical challenge at the border with the new administration considering changes that would allow more asylum seekers to enter our country in the midst of a pandemic. This will especially be a challenge in Arizona. The Wall Street Journal recently highlighted that our state is the nation's COVID-19 hotspot. We have the highest infection rate per capita, and our hospitals are all at or near capacity. So what steps do you plan to take, if confirmed, to ensure that DHS develops a COVID-19 testing strategy that protects our communities while ensuring asylum seekers are treated fairly?
Senator, thank you very much for your question. President-elect Biden and his incoming team have spoken very powerfully about both aspects of the question that you pose. Number one, that the health and well-being of the American public is the highest priority, and the President-elect has laid out an ambitious vision for tackling the COVID-19 pandemic that has caused our nation so much pain. And I look forward to the opportunity, should I be confirmed to be the next secretary, to be a part of that vision and that plan. The President-elect and his incoming team have also spoken of the commitment to enforce our asylum laws so that we provide humanitarian relief to those who qualify under them in the proudest traditions of our country. That will take time, and I hope I have the privilege of being a part of that effort as well.
Thank you. Most federal workers are slated to get vaccinated through county allocations, but counties along our southern border in Arizona are struggling with a disproportionately large percentage of Phase 1B essential workers. That includes our port officers and our Border Patrol agents. They work so hard to protect our borders and ensure the flow of trade. The recent news that DHS employees can access vaccines from VA medical centers is promising, but border communities like Yuma and Douglas are more than 2 hours by car from the nearest VA medical centers in Tucson and Phoenix. In order for all DHS employees to be assured fair and equitable access to a coronavirus vaccine, options should be available at community-based outpatient clinics. When confirmed, can you improve vaccine distribution and access for our DHS workforce?
Senator, one of my highest priorities, as I have had the privilege of articulating earlier in this hearing, is the well-being of our men and women throughout the Department of Homeland Security. And I am well aware of the challenges that our frontline personnel confront, especially because they often are confronting congregant settings that only increase the risk of the spread of COVID-19. I look forward to studying the issue, should I be confirmed, of working in an all-of-government effort to protect the government workforce across the federal architecture, especially, of course, in my priority area of the Department of Homeland Security, and, of course, the American public writ large.
Thank you. During the 2019 surge of asylum seekers at the border, the efforts of Arizona non-governmental organizations and our local governments to aid migrants who've been released by Customs and Border Protection was absolutely critical. Your prepared remarks describe the Department of Homeland Security as a department of partnerships. I agree. And I believe that partnering with local governments and organizations, especially in border communities, is critical. If you're confirmed, will you and Arizona DHS leaders work with me, our NGOs, and local governments to improve communication and cooperation regarding border security, asylum seekers and immigration, and the flow of trade across the border?
I would be honored to do so, Senator.
Thank you. Last Congress, I was proud to work with Senator Cornyn to pass my Southwest Border Security Technology Improvement Act. This critical law will make sure that DHS properly analyzes technology gaps along the border and develops smart solutions to fill them. I hope you'll work with me in my office as you develop the analysis required by our law to ensure our nation tackles border security in effective and efficient ways. What are some of the initial border technology challenges you want to examine once confirmed?
Senator, I would be honored to work with you to ensure that we are harnessing the best innovation, the best advances in technology to ensure border security, and not only border security in terms of tackling the challenges that we have been speaking about in this hearing, but also in facilitating and promoting lawful trade and travel, to really modernize our ports of entry and to facilitate the lawful flow of cargo and people that add to the prosperity of our economy. I think the challenges are considerable, as are the opportunities. I look forward to working with the Office of Science and Technology in the Department of Homeland Security to ensure that it is adequately resourced, and partnering with the other parts of the department, the other parts of the federal government, and harnessing the capabilities and opportunities in the private sector and academic institutions to make sure that we're bringing an all of government and an all of society approach to meeting the challenges and opportunities of the border.
I appreciate that. My time is rapidly closing down, so I'll quickly ask my last question about cybersecurity. It's a critical issue in Arizona. We've had ransomware attacks on Arizona medical, education, and governmental organizations, and the threats are growing. So we want to emphasize education about cyber hygiene early and often to get ahead of these threats. So will you work with my office and me to explore opportunities to enhance cyber education programs in Arizona and nationally?
I will, Senator.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield, well, I'm over my time. Thank you for your indulgence, and Mr. Chairman. And again, thanks to Senator Hassan for allowing me to speak ahead of her. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you, Senator Sinema. Senator Romney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Mayorkas, nice to see you. Appreciate your wife being here and your daughters. I'm sure your daughters are enjoying seeing you on the hot seat. I'm sure they've had that experience themselves with you. A couple of things. I want to follow up on something Senator Langford opened, which is apparently a caravan moving in our direction. What is your intention with regards to that caravan that is coming to our border? Is your intention to allow them just to come into the country? Will they be stopped? What's the plan?
Senator, we are a nation of immigrants, and we are also a nation of laws. And I intend to apply the law in the execution of my responsibilities as the Secretary of Homeland Security, should I have that privilege.
I understand that. And what does that mean in this regard? Does that mean that they will be interdicted and rejected from coming into the country, evaluated one by one? What's the plan?
Senator, when people present themselves at our border, we apply the laws of our nation to determine whether they qualify for relief under our humanitarian laws or whether they don't.
Kind of uncertain there, but I presume that means that they will not be allowed just to come into the country, that these people will be stopped at the border and processed one by one. Is that correct?
Senator, I apologize if I was uncertain. If people qualify under the law to remain in the United States, then we will apply the law accordingly. if they do not qualify to remain in the United States, then they won't.
Thank you. Chairman Portman raised a number of issues with regards to the EB-5 program and your involvement in what appeared to be political favoritism. And he asked you what lessons you've learned from that. I had the experience of serving as a governor and now as a senator. In each case, I've had a chief of staff who have acquainted me with anything that might provide the appearance of favoritism or conflict of interest of some kind, political or economic. Sometimes I don't notice those things, and they bring them to my attention. You should not involve yourself in this decision because it may be seen as being inappropriate, and as a result, you might lose the confidence of American people who entrust you to carry out your responsibilities without favoritism. I would have anticipated that when Senator Portman asked you, what have you learned from this process, that you might say, I have learned from the process that when something appears to be political, I should recuse myself. Is that not a lesson you learned with regards to this? Looking back on these circumstances, should you have not said, because I have been called by a leading Democrat, whether Governor Rendell or others of that nature, that in a circumstance like this, because of my political connection, I should recuse myself and let others take that responsibility? Is that not the appropriate action to take when something has the very distinct appearance of political favoritism?
Senator, let me, if I may, answer that in several parts, because the EB-5 Investor Visa Program is a program that involves very, very significant and complex business developments that involve hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars, and it was broken. And so for me to recuse myself from the program in its entirety would have been for me to abdicate my responsibility to fix
Of course.
the problem.
No, I'm only suggesting with regards to when an individual who happens to be a leading Democrat would call you, that meant, holy cow, I got to step back.
Well, Senator, on the one hand, I was very responsive to members of the United States Senate and the House of Representatives on both sides of the aisle. And I prided myself on my responsiveness, and I commit to continue in that responsiveness. We did establish guardrails to better protect against the appearance or the perception of favoritism as a result of the Inspector General's findings, and I would adhere to those guardrails and findings accordingly. I did, in fact, learn, Senator, how to better guard against the perception, and I agree with you 100% that it is our obligation to guard against that perception so that there is trust and confidence in the decision-making of government leaders.
Thank you. Some time ago, I toured the border with our nation in Mexico in San Diego and met with the head of the union responsible for keeping our border safe. And he said, look, the wall is helpful, but it's not going to stop people coming across the border as long as we have such a big magnet. And I said, what do you mean a big magnet? He said, well, if people are able to get paid $10 an hour from working on our side and only $1 an hour from working on the other side, they're going to find a way in. And from that, I recognize the importance of the E-Verify program, basically as something to punish American employers that hire people who come here illegally. Do you support the E-Verify program? Is it an important tool? Should it be mandatory? Should it be permanent? Is this an essential element of protecting our nation and the opportunities of employment for so many of our people today who've been put out of work because of the COVID crisis?
Senator, when I was the Director of U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, under my leadership, we made tremendous improvements to the E-Verify program, and under my leadership, voluntary enrollment in the E-Verify program increased dramatically. I would look forward to studying the utilization now of the EB-5 program, its effectiveness in the business community, its effectiveness in achieving its intended purposes, and I would look forward to working with you as I study the effectiveness of that program.
I assure you that I will be happy to work with you to see if we can't get E-Verify as a more effective tool for policing employers who hire folks that have come here illegally. I'll leave one question without much opportunity for you to respond to, given my time. But I've had the occasion of working someplace and wondering how I would do things differently than my boss. You've worked as the number 2 at the Department of Homeland Security. You probably looked at what your boss did. He was a great leader, but you probably got some ideas yourself as to things you would like to do differently. One that certainly must come to your mind is with regards to our cybersecurity. We are woefully unprepared from a cybersecurity standpoint in this nation and in our government, and hope that as you look at this agency and your new responsibilities, assuming you are confirmed, that you will focus on bringing a whole different level of expertise, both in defensive actions with regards to cybersecurity and offensive actions, and protect our government and our economy from those who would attack us in this new, most powerful way.
Senator, if I may respond briefly, I was incredibly proud to be the deputy to Secretary Johnson. Secretary Johnson prioritized a very evolving cybersecurity threat, and we made tremendous advances in the department under his ultimate leadership. The threat has only evolved and only grown since then, and I can assure you that the cybersecurity of our nation will be one of my highest priorities, because I concur with you that the threat is real and the threat is every day, and we have to do a much better job than we are doing now.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Romney. Senator Hassan.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member, for having this hearing. I want to thank Senators Feinstein and Tester for introducing our nominee today, and I want to thank you, Mr. Mayorkas, for your service and for your continued willingness to serve. And I want to thank your family, too, because nobody does this by themselves, and it's a huge family commitment. So please, everyone know how appreciative we are. I want to start with a question about domestic terrorism. We have seen a disturbing and alarming rise in domestic terrorism throughout the country, culminating, of course, in the violent attack on the United States Capitol 13 days ago. The Department of Homeland Security was created after 9/11 largely to address the lack of adequate information sharing about terrorism-related threats. Despite the fact that the threat of terrorism has evolved and changed in the nearly 20 years since the 9/11 attacks, no comprehensive federal review of terrorism information sharing has occurred to keep pace with the evolution of these threats. To address this, Senator Johnson and I introduced last Congress a bill to establish a federal interagency commission to review both domestic and international terrorism information sharing. In what you have seen in the preparation for your confirmation, and comparing it with your time as Deputy Secretary, do you feel information sharing on domestic and international terrorism is adequate?
Senator, thank you very much for your question. The Department of Homeland Security plays a leadership role in the collection of information with respect to the domestic and foreign terrorist threat and the dissemination of that information. The Office of Intelligence and Analysis is particularly on point. And I think that we can do a lot better in the distribution of that information to our brave first responders in local communities throughout our country. And I would look forward to working with you in this committee to make sure that that interagency task force of which you speak is built and its responsibilities are executed most effectively.
Well, thank you for that. One of the things that I learned over time as governor is that it is one thing to talk about information sharing and coordination. It's another thing to actually invest in it and make sure that it happens. And clearly, we need to do a better job at it in this area. Then I want to ask you a couple of questions to follow up on what Senator Romney started to talk about on cybersecurity. The SolarWinds cyber attack revealed vulnerabilities across the government in the system designed to prevent such a far-reaching attack. As Secretary, you will be charged with immediately reviewing the adequacy of two Department of Homeland Security programs, the Einstein program and the Continuing Diagnostics and Mitigation, or CDM program, in order to understand why they did not detect or prevent these intrusions. Do you have any initial thoughts on the performance of these programs and whether any fundamental changes will be required to either?
Senator, I look forward to studying the SolarWinds attack. Of course, I've been studying it intensely as a private citizen. Should I have the privilege of serving as the secretary, I will avail myself of the best and latest intelligence that the United States has with respect to this attack, and conducting a thorough review of Einstein and continuous diagnostics and mitigation to understand whether Einstein and CDM, as it is commonly referred to, are appropriately designed and appropriately and effectively executed to stop a threat such as SolarWinds, and if not, what other defenses need we develop in the federal government to best protect our very valuable equities and resources.
Thank you. I look forward to working with you on that as well. Let's turn to state and local cybersecurity for a minute. In December, Senator Paul and I held a hearing to examine the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on state and local entities as they work to defend against cyber threats. One of the witnesses was Dennis Goulet, the president of the National Association of State Chief Information Officers, and also the commissioner of New Hampshire's Department of Information Technology. In his testimony, Commissioner Goulet implored Congress to authorize a standalone federal cybersecurity grant program that would help state and local entities afford to take the steps that they need to strengthen their information technology systems. The National Governors Association and several other entities have echoed this call. Mr. Mayorkas, when you consider the current state of federal support to state and local governments, would you support a standalone grant program? Moreover, what elements of a grant program would need to be included in order to make an effort like this sustainable?
Senator, you raise a very, very important point, because in the cybersecurity world, we often say that we are only as strong as our weakest link. And we have to recognize that there are local communities that don't have the financial or other wherewithal to really safeguard their cyber assets and best protect against the threats that they confront. And there are a number of different solutions that we need to consider, whether it is improving our information sharing so that the best practices of one geography are shared with other geographies and we raise the bar across the board. And also, to your very valid point, Senator, whether we should institute a federal grant program to provide assets to those communities that don't have them adequately to deal with a very sophisticated threat. I look forward to considering a grant proposal and working with you in that regard.
Thank you. I think there are other grant programs that we do out of DHS or DOJ that really, on our physical defenses, try to play this role, and I think it's time for us to catch up to that kind of grant program in the cyberspace. So I look forward to working on it with you. Why don't I yield back the rest of my time? If there is a second round, Mr. Chair, I have a couple of more questions, but thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Senator Hasman. Senator Scott.
Sure. Thank you, Chairman. First off, I want to thank you, Ms. Mayorkas, for your past service.
Senator Scott, your audio is not coming through. Can you maybe go off mute? Let's try it again.
Yeah, we did it on our end. Can you hear me now?
That sounds better.
Oh, okay. Maybe just stand the volume up. Okay. Thank you again, Chairman, for the opportunity here today. I want to thank Ms. Mayorkas for his past service and willingness to serve. We had a good call the other day.
Senator Scott, we're still not able to hear you. Maybe there's a way to turn up your microphone or come closer to the computer.
All right, I'll just get closer to the computer. How's this? Is this better?
That's much better.
Okay, how's that? All right, first off, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank Mr. Mayorkas for his past service and his willingness to serve. And I'm sure your family is very proud of what you've accomplished. One thing, we had a good call the other day, and one thing we talked about was border security And I think your belief was that that there were other things to do besides having the border wall to provide security. When you look at the caravan, and then you look at the video today of that caravan walking, and you're really just pushing through the Guatemalan police force. How would you handle something like that on the border if we didn't have a border wall?
I think, Senator Scott and Mr. Chairman, I think I captured Senator Scott's question. When I served as the Deputy Secretary and I met with the Border Patrol, both at headquarters and in the field along the southern border, what I heard from the Border Patrol was that we need a diverse approach to border security. That in some instances a physical barrier would be effective, but that in other instances more boots on the ground would assist, and yet in other circumstances the use of technology, the use of air and marine assets would be most effective. And I look forward to studying the challenges at the border and developing a sophisticated approach to meet those challenges, to be sure that we're harnessing innovation and technology to the best of our abilities.
Thank you, Mr. Mayorkas. So on the with regard to the wall itself, would you tear down parts of the wall? Would you stop the construction that's going on? How would you deal with the existing plans with regard to the wall?
Senator Scott, President-elect Biden has committed to stop construction of the border wall. It would be my responsibility to execute on that commitment, and I have not looked at the question of what we do with respect to the wall that already has been built, and I look forward to studying that question, understanding the costs and benefits of doing so, being open and transparent with you and with all members of this committee, sharing my thoughts and considerations, and working cooperatively with you towards a solution.
Thank you, Mr. Mayorkas. We talked about this the other day. Could you repeat your position with regard to funding Border Patrol and ICE, and whether you think we should continue to fund them or we should abolish them?
Senator, U.S. Customs and Border Protection, U.S. Customs and Immigration Enforcement play critical roles in the federal government, and I would not abolish them.
On I'm from Florida, and in Florida we have hurricanes, and we've had some floods, but other states have wildfires and more floods than we probably have. But FEMA partnership and the federal funding for those programs have been pretty important to us. There's a recent reports that the Biden administration is thinking about taking $2 billion out of funding for natural disasters and giving it to New York and New York City, basically to backfill their budgets that they've not been. I was a governor when Cuomo was governor, and he's never lived within his means, been able to balance his budget. But what do you think about taking money out of the FEMA program for natural disasters and funding budget shortfalls in New York and New York City?
Senator, I'm not familiar with that proposal. I very well understand the value that the Disaster Relief Fund that is administered by FEMA, the disaster relief and security grants that FEMA administers. I well understand their importance to communities that suffer from extreme weather conditions and natural disasters. I would want to study any such proposal that sought to reallocate those important resources, and I assure you once again that I will work collaboratively with you and share my findings and work with you towards the best solution on behalf of the communities and the American public.
Thank you. One last thing. We talked a little bit about communist China and the fact that they use slave labor and they have a significant amount of counterfeit goods that are coming in this country. And we talked about our international mail centers and things like that. So we're clearly not stopping everything. So what would you do to both, from an enforcement standpoint and from a informing the public standpoint of getting Americans understand the risk of buying Chinese products that might be used, produced with slave labor, or because they're counterfeit, or because they're poor quality.
Senator, I am very well aware of the threat that China poses. I am very well aware of the exploitation of workers in China, the manufacture of goods that are exported outside of China. As a matter of fact, I prosecuted one of the very first cases in that area back in the late 1990s. I am also aware, tragically, of the amount of illegal substances that are exported from China and imported into the United States that kill thousands and thousands of Americans every day. I have visited the Customs and Border Protection mail interdiction facilities across our country, and I've seen the substances that do so much harm to our communities. And rest assured, Senator, that I will devote considerable resources and considerable attention to battling these grave and serious threats, and look forward to doing so in partnership with this committee.
Thank you, Ms. Mayorkas. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Scott. Senator Rosen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Peters, and Mr. Mayorkas, thank you for being with us today, for your commitment to serving our nation. I appreciated our productive meeting last month. I look forward to hearing more about your plans to secure our homeland while treating immigrant communities with both dignity and respect. Amidst a global pandemic and with ever-present threat of cyber attacks, domestic terrorism, and adversaries from abroad, I urge this committee to facilitate a swift confirmation for Mr. Mayorkas so he can immediately get to work for our country. So I'd like to ask the first question about protecting Daca and TPS, because the Daca and TPS programs, well, they provided critical protections to an estimated 13,000 Daca recipients and more than 4,000 TPS holders in Nevada, from college students, small business owners, to medical professionals and members of our armed forces. However, the Trump administration relentlessly targeted these programs, causing significant stress and uncertainty within our communities. This is all the more troubling as thousands of DACA and TPS recipients who are frontline workers continue to risk their lives to help combat the COVID-19 pandemic. While Congress will continue to work in a bipartisan manner to permanently protect DACA and TPS, the administration must strengthen these programs to protect dreamers and TPS holders. So how do you plan to protect DACA recipients until we pass comprehensive immigration reform?
Senator, thank you. The President-elect Biden has committed to presenting Congress on day one with a permanent solution, an immigration reform bill, and I would be privileged to serve as the Secretary and work with Congress in passing legislation to fix our much broken immigration system. President-elect Biden also has committed to reinstituting the DACA program that I was proud to implement when I served as the Director of U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. And President-elect Biden also has committed to following the law and applying temporary protected status, or TPS as it is commonly known, to populations who qualify for it by reason of the country conditions in their nations of origin. I look forward to executing the President's commitments, should I have the honor of serving as the Secretary of Homeland Security.
And one final point on this, we do have a lot of TPS recipients in Nevada. And so how do we strengthen the review process, or strengthen our process to provide more certainty to some of these recipients who've been here for decades, and frankly, they're pillars within our community?
Senator, again, I look forward to working with Congress in finding a permanent solution to immigration reform and the needs of individuals who have been resident in this country for many, many years and have contributed to its well-being. Temporary protected status has statutory requirements that we in the Obama-Biden administration were very proud to apply in adherence to the law and in the service of the equitable and humanitarian considerations that the law contemplated. I look forward to doing so in close partnership with you and this committee.
Thank you. You know, in the past few years, we have seen an alarming increase in domestic anti-Semitism and white supremacist extremism, from neo-Nazis chanting "Jews will not replace us" in Charlottesville to the deadliest attack against the Jewish community in modern American history at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh. Just this month, we saw American citizens lay siege to the U.S. Capitol, waving Confederate flags, hanging a noose on the West Front lawn, and wearing Camp Auschwitz T-shirts. Despite the fact that DHS concluded last year that racially and ethnically motivated violent extremists, specifically white supremacist extremists, will remain the most persistent and lethal threat in the homeland, the department has not adequately invested in combating domestic threats. I'd like to talk a little bit about our nonprofit security grant program. FEMA provides this to synagogues, Jewish community centers, other nonprofits, houses of worship all across this country to protect against terrorist attacks. And in recent years, DHS offices we have tried to prevent domestic terrorism, but we've faced major cuts in personnel and funding. The department lacks a coherent strategy to combat anti-Semitism and white supremacist extremism online, which far too often, unfortunately, manifests itself in real-life actions. I'm co-chair of the Senate Bipartisan Task Force Combating Anti-Semitism along with Senator Langford. But I'd like to ask you, what are your plans for addressing anti-Semitism and really tackling these online platforms that are promoting anti-Semitism?
Senator, I am profoundly aware of the threat and existence of anti-Semitism in our country and the world. My mother lost her paternal grandparents and 7 uncles by reason of their Jewish faith in the Holocaust. My mother fled her home with her parents because of the Holocaust. I have dedicated a considerable amount of my personal and professional energy to battling anti-Semitism and discrimination of all forms. Most recently, I served on the advisory board of the Secure Community Network, sponsored by the Jewish Federation, to protect day schools, synagogues, and places of worship. I've worked with the Anti-Defamation League to battle discrimination and hate of all forms. Under my leadership as the Deputy Secretary of Homeland Security, we grew the nonprofit grant program to best protect minority communities, communities of faith, from the scourge of hate, and I would be privileged to work with you in this committee to make sure that we build on those advances and once and for all tackle this challenge that has caused so much pain to so many.
Thank you. I have more questions. If there's a second round, I'll yield back my time. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Rosen. Senator Hawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Mayorkas, thank you for being here. Congratulations on your nomination. Let me come back to a question that Senator Scott asked a moment ago regarding the border wall system. And I just wanted to follow up on your answer to make sure that I was clear. As you know, Congress has recently appropriated and enacted into law $1.4 billion in additional funding for the border wall system. My question is, I just wanted to be clear on this. Do you intend, if you are confirmed, to obligate and distribute those funds as they have been allotted and designated by Congress?
Senator Hawley, I know that as I previously expressed President-elect Biden is committed to cease funding for further construction of the border wall. I would execute President-elect Biden's commitment in adherence to the laws that guide us.
Does that mean, Mr. Mayorkas, that you intend not to obligate and spend the funds as directed by Congress? I mean, I'm aware of the President-elect's commitment, and I think it stands in some tension with the law passed, adopted, and duly enacted by this body. So I just want to be clear on where we're headed. Are you telling me that you don't think that the $1.4 billion that has been enacted, that has been directed towards the border wall system, that you will not follow the law and obligate that? I just am trying to understand what your position is going to be.
Well, Senator, let me, if I may, strike at the fundamental point that I believe you were inquiring of, which is, will I follow the law and the execution of my responsibilities should I have the privilege of serving as the Secretary of Homeland Security? And the answer is yes, I will follow the law. And what I would need to do is to understand what the law provides with respect to the obligation of funds to construct the border wall, and see what the opportunities are to discontinue any such obligation if in fact the law permits, and act accordingly.
Very good. That does answer my question, and you got right to the nub of it, which was what you'll do with regard to the law as it currently stands. So I look forward to seeing the actions that you take there. Let me come back to the subject of immigration policy a little bit more broadly. And speaking of the President-elect's plans, he has said that he intends to propose, as early as his first day in office, so tomorrow, a plan for amnesty to up to 11 million illegal immigrants. Now, I have to tell you, I have concerns about that, especially in this time of severe economic distress that has fallen disproportionately on working class Americans. Give me a sense of do you support a mass amnesty? 11 million is a very, very large number. Do you support mass amnesty on that scale? Give me a sense of your thinking on this.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak to that important issue, Senator Hawley. President-elect Biden has committed to presenting Congress on day one with an immigration reform bill that once and for all fixes, I think, what we all can agree is a broken immigration system. And he has spoken of the need for a path to citizenship for the individuals who have been in this country for many years, who have contributed to our communities and to this nation's economic prosperity. I would be privileged to work with Congress to pass immigration reform legislation that provides that path and provides a permanent solution to what is clearly a broken system.
Are you worried at all, Mr. Mayorkas, that an amnesty on that scale, such as envisioned by the President-elect, will become itself a pull factor? Senator Scott mentioned the recent migrant caravan from Honduras headed towards the United States that appears to have been disrupted in Guatemala. But are you concerned? I'm concerned about the pull factor here, as well as the policy, again, implications, particularly as it relates to working Americans. But are you concerned about a pull factor in an amnesty of that scale?
Senator Hawley, I remember the bipartisan piece of legislation that the United States Senate proposed a number of years ago with the path to citizenship for individuals who had contributed to our nation's well-being for many years, and the fact that it spoke of certain requirements to ensure that individuals who had been here and contributed to the United States could gain that path, and those who had not yet arrived would not. But with respect to the pull and push factor, separately, if I may, Senator Hawley, let me speak to the push factor, because I don't think its severity can be overstated. And I say this because President-elect Biden has articulated an ambitious and visionary plan for addressing the root causes of irregular migration. When loving parents are willing to send their young child alone to traverse Mexico to reach the dangerous southern border between the United States and Mexico because of the acute violence and severe poverty and the fear of persecution. I think we need to address the push factor as the gravest challenge to irregular migration, and therefore the investment in countries where so many people are fleeing, the investments in building a refugee program in the Western Hemisphere and in the region, so that humanitarian relief is provided and our border is not the first place at which those needs are confronted, I think is a vital and underlying solution to the problem we confront.
Thank you for that. Let me ask you two more questions. Mr. Chairman, I'll try to be brief. I want to ask you about the migrant protection protocols, and then I want to ask you about human trafficking. But just quickly, Mr. Mayorkas, on the migrant protection protocols, this is, as you know, the Trump administration's policy of processing migrants in Mexico, helping to restore a safe and orderly immigration process while deterring those dangerous crossings that you were just talking about. Do you anticipate continuing to implement the migration protection protocols, or will you end them?
Senator Hawley, I think you were cut off midstream in your final question, but I think I understand your question, which is, would I continue with the Migration Protection Protocols, or MPP, as the acronym is known? President-elect Biden has spoken of his commitment to end the Migration Protection Protocols, and I would execute on that commitment should I have the privilege of serving as the Secretary.
Okay, last question, Mr. Chairman. Human trafficking, Mr. Mayorkas. Last October, the department launched a new integrated operations system, a center rather for countering human trafficking led by ICE. They've had considerable success, but there is a tremendous amount of work left to do. As Secretary, if confirmed, would you continue to prioritize combating human trafficking and supporting ICE and the department as a whole in its battle against this modern day form of slavery?
I would, Senator. I would look forward to working with you in that regard, and I can share with you that for 12 years as a federal prosecutor, I focused considerable energy and effort on combating human trafficking and prosecuting the perpetrators of it.
Thank you, Mr. Mayorkas. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Hawley. We'll now go to a second round, and I know some members were not able to stay. Let's make this a lightning round. A lightning round. We're going to go quickly and try to get yes or no answers. First, we talked about the Inspector General report earlier. I wanted to give you a chance to respond to the second part of it, which was the report that indicated that there were employees, whistleblowers, as they were called by the IG, who stepped forward and said that they were poorly treated at USCIS. How do you explain that over 15 of these employees from different locations and employment levels provided testimony on how they were treated poorly by you? How do you respond to that?
Mr. Chairman, I'm very grateful to you that you've asked that question, because I know you referenced that in your opening statement, and quite candidly, if you hadn't asked this question of me, I would have requested the opportunity to address it before we adjourned this hearing. Mr. Chairman, my father taught me a very important principle, and that is that an organization chart is vertical when it comes to the division of responsibilities, but it is horizontal and perfectly flat when it comes to the stature of each and every individual in the organization. And my father taught me that, not by words, but by how he conducted himself. And I'm immensely proud of the fact that I have adhered to that lesson throughout my career as a professional and throughout my life as a human being. And Senator, Mr. Chairman, you can ask the thousands of people who have worked with me over my career about how I have conducted myself, and I'm very proud of that fact. And the fact is, that's my greatest source of pride, the dignity and respect with which I have treated others. And as the Director of U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, Mr. Chairman, as I mentioned before, I fix problems. And sometimes fixing problems means making improvements. And sometimes making improvements means making change. And some people aren't happy with change. But change, improvement, fixing problems is my commitment. And I take stock in the fact that just today, an article was published about me, and I read in there Mr. Homan's comment. Mr. Homan was the leader of Immigration and Customs Enforcement during this administration, and he was the head of enforcement and removal operations when I served as the Deputy Secretary. Mr. Homan and I disagreed on policy from time to time, but we had mutual respect. And what he said about me was the fact that I always listened, that I always invited differing views, and I respected the articulation of them. I made my decisions, but I was fair and understanding and open and transparent in receiving and in inviting different views, because that is an obligation to make sure that we bring the best thinking to the table on behalf of the American people. I'm deeply proud, immensely proud of my conduct as a person and as a professional.
Thank you. That question wasn't necessarily appropriate for a lightning round, I guess.
Well, I think
we appreciate the answer.
The question was, perhaps my answer wasn't.
I have to make a comment here with regard to the IG, because one of my colleagues earlier questioned the integrity of the IG. And as you know, Mr. John Roth was the IG who issued the report and substantially completed it. His predecessor was the IG that my colleague was talking about. And I just want to put that on the record, again, not to have anybody's reputation unfairly besmirched in this process. And Mr. Roth, by the way, was widely regarded, now a private citizen. I did speak to him about the report, which he stands by, and unanimously confirmed by the Senate. So let me ask you about the particular issues on cybersecurity. You and I had a chance to go into this in some detail in our conversation. As you know, the SolarWinds massive breach concerns all of us, and frankly, is not that surprising given what we had been finding, which is that the federal government is not well prepared to deal with these kinds of breaches that are going to be increasingly a challenge for us. CISA, which is the group within the Homeland Security Department that you talked about earlier, I believe has been stretched too thin. You know, they did a great job on the elections, keeping cyber attacks from happening in the election, but they, unfortunately, during that same time period, did not even know about the Russian, apparently Russian massive cyber breach. Can you comment on what CISA should do going forward? It's a new agency. Congress have given them a lot of responsibility. I don't think we've given them an adequate mission that's focused enough or adequate resources to be able to carry out that mission. So that's my view. But what is your view on CISA? What do you commit to do if you are confirmed with respect to getting CISA on its feet as a federal coordinating body to deal with cyber threats?
Mr. Chairman, this committee deserves tremendous praise for standing up CISA as the critical agency in the Department of Homeland Security that really owns the cybersecurity mission on behalf of the department. And I think Congress deserves credit for the NDAA's provisions, further equipping CISA to meet its statutory obligations and the challenges and opportunities that it confronts. CISA must improve the cyber hygiene of the federal government, the many departments and agencies throughout it. It must strengthen the public-private partnership, not only for the benefit, of course, of the federal government, but for the benefit of the private sector itself. I take stock of the fact that the Solarium Commission's recommendation for a national cybersecurity director was passed. I think this is going to require an all-of-government approach, and there's a great amount that will rest on the shoulders of CISA, and I hope I have the privilege to lead the department and support CISA in meeting those obligations.
That's good. And you talked about cyber hygiene. The Federal Information Security Modernization Act, also known as FISMA, looks at the agencies every year and decides how they're doing, and DHS cybersecurity program was rated ineffective. So it's not just that CISA needs to work on the rest of government, there needs to be a little work in-house to be able to straighten that out. Are you committed to doing that?
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman, we need to lead by example.
We talked earlier a little about the drug issue, and as you know, I'm the author of the STOP Act, which has been effective at keeping some of this fentanyl from coming in from China by mail. Unfortunately, the department, particularly CBP, has not been moving forward as they should to be able to implement that. The CBP regulations regarding how the STOP Act will be implemented were due in October of 2019. October of 2019, they still haven't been finalized. As a result, the STOP Act, which said that we have to require China to provide this advanced electronic data on all packages by the end of last year, so a couple weeks ago, was not met. And Congress stepped in with my support, and we gave them another 3 months. Otherwise, hundreds of thousands of packages would have been turned away. But we've got to get these regulations in place, and we've got to be sure and meet that new March 15th deadline. Are you committed to doing that, to make sure those regulations are put in place and that we can get the STOP Act fully implemented?
I certainly am, Mr. Chairman, and when we last spoke, you notified me of this issue, and I followed up, and should I have the privilege of being confirmed, one of my priorities will be to make sure that we promulgate those regulations, because I very well understand the urgency of the threat that you have identified.
We've got to keep this poison coming in our communities directly by our U.S. mail system. We know we have more to do on the border now, too, because that's where much of it has shifted. On E-Verify, I take your answer earlier to Senator Romney. I thought his question was excellent about the need for us to strengthen E-Verify. It's not just a matter of making sure that more companies step up and voluntarily use it, in my view. It's a matter of changing the program so it is more effective, and specifically, obviously, the issue of identification. If you have false identification, fraudulently obtained identification, then the program is not going to work effectively. Will you commit to work with us on dealing with the pull factor, which is the magnet of U.S. jobs?
Senator, I look forward to working with and commit to working with this committee on all issues that come before the Department of Homeland Security.
But specifically on E-Verify, are you willing to work with us on strengthening that program?
Yes, I am.
The Trafficking Center was talked about earlier. We do a lot of work in this committee on the trafficking issue. Homeland Security also has responsibilities, I said earlier. It's one of my priorities. Can you commit to looking at this issue of elevating the new center out of HSI, where it is now, to the headquarters level?
Senator, I would be pleased to look at that and the capacity of the headquarters to really administer that most effectively. I would like to study that issue, and I commit to sharing my findings with you. I understand the prioritization of that mission set, and whether it belongs in headquarters or HSI is something I would like the opportunity to review, should I be privileged to do so.
Given the mission, I think it's much more appropriate that it be at the headquarters level to be able to be effective, and we can talk about that. Secret Service, I have talked to you about this already. My understanding is that you think the Secret Service should stay at the Department of Homeland Security. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
My concern, having known a lot of members of the Secret Service, having been a protectee, is that they continue to be overworked and undervalued. And they have enormous strain on them, including right now with regard to this inauguration tomorrow. Would you agree to prioritize, from a staffing and budgeting perspective, ensuring that the Secret Service has what they need to be able to do its mission?
I would, Mr. Chairman.
We look forward to working with you on that. There are a number of issues that connected today with regard to anti-Semitism and pushing back against white supremacists. One of the things that we have done in this committee since you were last in government is we have substantially expanded the nonprofit security grant program to help with regard to all kinds of faith-based organizations and nonprofits, including synagogues and Jewish community centers and so on that have been under threat in my home state of Ohio. Specifically, Senator Peters and I led an authorization bill for the program that we got signed into law just last year. We also increased the funding this year to $180 million, and Senator Gillibrand and I are working on some other improvements to the program. My question for you is, are you willing to work with us and work with our partners around the country, and this is being done, as you know, through FEMA, to ensure that we have adequate help for these faith-based communities to be able to push back against the extremist threat, number one, and number two, my longer-term concern is sustainability. Many of these organizations are getting grants. In Ohio, frankly, a number have applied and been successful. But to sustain these programs over time, whether it's cameras, we've expanded the program in the last couple of years to include security personnel as an example, or whether it's simply having the ability to fully guard against these attacks by having the facilities hardened against potential attacks. The long-term sustainability of these programs concerns me, and I wonder if you'd be willing to work with us on that as well.
I would on both counts. Mr. Chairman, I'm very well aware of the Nonprofit Security Grant Program. Under my leadership and Secretary Johnson's leadership, we increased it. Very grateful to this committee for increasing it further, and I will understand its needs.
Thank you, Mr. Mayorkas. Senator Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Mayorkas, thank you for your testimony here. You're answering questions, I should say, lots of questions. We've had you here for quite a period of time. You've had a full range of questions to answer. They've been very thorough, very thoughtful. And I'm just going to keep you here for a couple more that I'd like to have asked before we close out this hearing. You've talked about technology and infrastructure investments. There were a number of questions by my colleagues that were asked along those lines, and how we can secure our ports of entry. There's no question the Department of Homeland Security has one of the most difficult jobs you can imagine as I think about when it comes to border security. One, you have to keep us safe every day. We expect you to do that. At the same time, the economic activity that goes across the borders has to continue and has to happen in a very efficient manner. I represent a border state in the state of Michigan. I oftentimes have to remind some of my colleagues that there is a northern border in this country as well, not just the southern border. In fact, if you look at the ports of entry in Michigan from terms of the land trade that goes across it, we're 2 of the 5 busiest border crossings in North America are in Michigan between Canada. If Michigan were a country, we'd be the 2nd largest trading partner with Canada. And so we have demands there and needs. And so my question to you is that we have to allocate resources. You have a northern border that demands resources, southern border, you have our coastal cities as well and ports of entry there. How do you see managing that and making sure there are equitable deployment of resources to deal with the security threats all across our country, but also the needs to be able to move trade efficiently across those borders in a secure fashion?
Ranking Member Peters, thank you very much. I traveled the northern border during my tenure as the Deputy Secretary. I well understand while much attention is given to our southern border, we cannot neglect the other borders. Northern border and, quite frankly, the air and maritime challenges that we as a country face. The challenges that the Department of Homeland Security confronts are many and varied. And the department needs a leader who understands them, who works incredibly hard to meet all the many and varied challenges, that knows how to prioritize mission sets, and yet knows how to dedicate attention and resources to all of the responsibilities that we as a Department of Homeland Security are obligated to fulfill on on behalf of the American people. I respectfully and humbly submit that I am qualified to do so, and that I would work with you and other members of this committee to make sure that all our borders are protected against the challenges that seek to do us harm, and that also the opportunities that the borders present in terms of the facilitation and promotion of lawful trade and travel are fully exploited for the benefit of the American people. I commit to you that cooperation.
Well, I appreciate that, and certainly the threats that we face across all those borders happen daily, which is why this appointment to this position is absolutely critical to do it as quickly as possible. We need to have steady leadership at the Department of Homeland Security. It's involved in if you think of all of the demands that we have of government, what citizens expect from the federal government, I think it's safe to say the #1 priority for everybody, and the one that I believe passionately in, is to keep us safe. Federal government needs to keep us safe. That's the Department of Homeland Security, it's the Department of Defense, and other folks who are engaged in security. But this position is critical, and hopefully we can fill this as quickly as possible given the threats that we constantly face. And I'm just going to close with one threat that I want your sense of your experience and your thoughts, and that is biodefense. We've talked about a lot of other security offenses, but certainly the pandemic has shown us the threat that we get from a biological threat that we have to address, that we have to mitigate. And federal preparations for disease outbreaks also include things like bioterrorism that could be used by not a natural occurrence of a bio threat like this pandemic, but we could be the subject of a bioterrorist attack. And there are other biological challenges that all fit within the department's responsibilities. But as you know, biodefense, like so many of your responsibilities within the DHS, it cuts across many different federal agencies. So my question to you, Mr. Mayorkas, can you speak about what experiences you've had as a deputy secretary that would inform you as to how we should approach these cross-cutting issues like biodefense?
Thank you, Ranking Member Peters. Let me answer in two parts. Number one, with respect to the Department of Homeland Security, internally within the department, I had the privilege of getting to know the men and women in the department who focused on the particular threat of which you speak, and I understand their qualifications and capabilities, and it was, they were extraordinary, number one. Number two, I think you correctly point out that this requires an all-of-government effort, and it speaks to one of the points I made in my opening remarks, which is that fundamentally the Department of Homeland Security is a department of partnership, and we must work with our federal partners and our state and local, tribal and territorial partners to meet the threats that we confront, and that includes the bio threat of which you speak.
Thank you, Mr. Mayorkas. Thank you for your willingness to serve our country once again. Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Thank you, Senator Peters. Mr. Mayorkas, thank you again for your testimony this morning, and we appreciate your willingness to serve, especially at a time when our government works to counter so many serious threats and future threats, as we've talked about today. I also acknowledge that public service is a family decision and that it involves family sacrifices. So we appreciate your daughters and your wife being here today and their support of your decision to return to public service. Before we end today, a few housekeeping matters. The nominee has filed responses to biographical and financial questionnaires, answered pre-hearing questions submitted by the committee, and had his financial statements reviewed by the Office of Government Ethics. Without objection, this information will now be made part of the hearing record, and with the exception of the financial data, which are on file and available for public inspection in the committee offices, all will be available in the record. The hearing record will remain open until 5 p.m. today, January 19, for submission of statements and questions for the record. With that, the hearing is adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you for all you do. You're part of all this. Thank you. Thank you. Good. Yeah, good. I'm sure you will. You put up good hands. Good. Good to have you here the whole time. It was good. You're going to be there always for them, I know.
Yes, we will.
Take care.
Thank you.